Imagine an army that spent 8 months slowly grinding forward, burning through tanks and soldiers, taking one village at a time. Now imagine that same army pulls back in days, leaving behind equipment worth billions of dollars. That is exactly what just happened on the Eastern Front, and nobody saw it coming until it was already over. Satellite photos from that morning showed columns of vehicles moving not forward but backward for the first time in months. Russian flags that had flown over captured towns for over a year were suddenly gone. The maps that military analysts had been drawing every single day for months, those maps that always showed Russia creeping forward, those maps needed to be redrawn entirely in less than a week. By the time this ends, you will know exactly why Russia suddenly abandoned positions that cost them dearly to capture, what Ukraine's bold move tells us about the future of this war, and why the world powers are watching this one moment more closely than any other in the past 2 years. You will understand something that most news coverage completely misses, that this retreat was not just a military failure, but a sign of something much bigger happening behind the scenes that will shape your world for years to come. Here is why this matters right now. In the past 30 days, satellite images from Maxar Technologies confirmed something extraordinary. Ukrainian forces pushed into Russian territory near Kursk for the first time since the invasion began. Simultaneously, Ukrainian drones struck Russian airfields deep inside Russia, destroying billions of dollars in aircraft and fuel storage. Then on the Eastern Front, Ukrainian units recaptured the city of Toretsk in a single week, a city Russia had claimed as a victory for months. These three things happening together is what forced the retreat. Reuters reported on all three developments in the last 2 weeks. But here is the part that most channels are missing. None of this would have been possible without a quiet revolution in Ukrainian drone manufacturing that started 3 years ago when almost nobody was paying attention. Let me make sure you understand who the main players are here, because this gets confusing if you do not know the backstory. Vladimir Putin is the president of Russia, and he wants to expand Russian territory and remove Ukraine's government. Volodymyr Zelensky is Ukraine's president, and he wants to keep his country free and eventually join defensive alliances like NATO. Russia and Ukraine have been fighting since Russia invaded in February 2022. Russia wants a buffer zone along its border. Ukraine wants its land back. Think of it like two neighbors arguing over a fence line, except one neighbor brought in a bulldozer. The United States and Europe have been sending weapons and money to Ukraine, while China has been trading with Russia and staying carefully neutral. This is not just a fight between two countries anymore. It is a proxy battleground where the world's biggest powers are testing their weapons and strategies without actually fighting each other directly. The mechanism behind what happened is actually pretty simple to understand once you break it down. Russia has been using a strategy called pressure tactics for months. That means they attack the same spot over and over, burning through Ukrainian ammunition and soldiers until the position collapses. This worked in places like Avdiivka, where Russia eventually took the town after months of fighting. But this strategy requires one thing to keep working: endless supplies of soldiers and equipment. The problem is Russia is running into a wall. According to the Institute for the Study of War, a think tank that tracks this war daily, Russia was losing roughly 3 soldiers for every 1 Ukrainian soldier killed in these grinding battles. That ratio sounds small, but over months it adds up to massive losses. By the most recent estimates from open-source intelligence groups, Russia has lost over 70,000 soldiers killed in action since the invasion began. That is more than the entire population of some small towns. And the wounded numbers are even higher. Now, here is where Ukraine made its move. They started hitting Russia where it hurts most, not on the front lines, but deep behind them. Ukraine's long-range drones started striking Russian oil refineries. According to Bloomberg, Ukraine hit 11 refineries in the first 3 months of 2024 alone. Russia makes money from oil exports to fund the war. Less oil refining means less money for weapons and bullets. Ukraine also started hitting Russian airfields with drones made in Ukraine. The Financial Times reported that Russia lost at least 6 aircraft in a single night of attacks in April. These attacks did not grab headlines the way battlefield victories do, but they slowly squeezed Russia's war machine. It is like punching someone in the stomach instead of the face. The face gets attention, but the stomach makes them too weak to fight back. Then Ukraine did something bold in August. They crossed into Russian territory near Kursk. This was the first time Ukrainian boots were on Russian soil since World War II. Russia had to pull troops from the Eastern Front to defend their own land. That created openings in Russian lines that Ukraine exploited immediately. Within weeks, Ukrainian units pushed into Toretsk and other positions that Russia had held for months. Russia retreated because they had no choice. They could not defend everywhere at once. The front lines that Russia had spent billions building up suddenly had gaps wide enough to drive trucks through. Military analysts who had been predicting a Russian victory just months earlier were now writing reports about a possible turning point in the conflict. But here's where it gets really interesting, because what happened next is something almost nobody predicted. The retreat exposed something that changes everything about how we understand this war. Russia was not just losing ground, they were running out of the things that made their army work in the first place. The retreat set off a chain reaction that is still unfolding today. When Russia pulled back from Toretsk, their supply lines to other positions became exposed. Other units had to fall back or risk being cut off entirely. This creates what military experts call a cascading effect. One retreat forces another retreat, and so on. The impact goes far beyond the battlefield, though. Russia is a major oil exporter, and the drone strikes on refineries are cutting into their export capacity. Germany, which has been heavily dependent on Russian energy, had to increase imports from other countries. That shifts global oil markets in ways that affect your gas prices right here at home. When Russia cannot export as much oil, other exporters raise their prices to fill the gap. Beyond oil, Ukraine's drone industry is now competing with China in the global market. According to Defense News, several countries in Southeast Asia and the Middle East that once bought Chinese drones are now testing Ukrainian alternatives. That is a massive shift in a market worth tens of billions of dollars. And in Eastern Europe, Poland and the Baltic states are accelerating their defense spending. Poland announced plans to double its army size. Countries that once thought they could stay out of this conflict are now preparing as if it could arrive at their borders. In the United States, defense contractors are seeing record orders for artillery shells and anti-drone systems. This war is reshaping how every country in the world thinks about military spending. Now, I want to show you the other side of this because I think you deserve to hear it. There are analysts who say this retreat is temporary. Russia has massive reserves of equipment and personnel that they have not used yet. Some military experts think Russia is deliberately trading space for time, waiting for winter when Ukrainian energy infrastructure becomes a target again. The ground freezes in winter, which makes tank movement easier. Others point out that Ukraine's gains in Russian territory are modest and easily defended if Russia commits serious resources. The drone strikes on refineries are annoying, but Russia still exports oil through pipelines that drones cannot easily reach. Critics also note that Ukraine is running low on soldiers and money. Western aid has been delayed by political fights in Congress and European capitals. The Hungarian government has repeatedly blocked new EU aid packages. Poland's new government has different priorities than the previous one. Ukraine may be winning battles now, but the long-term math might still favor Russia. And here's the point that keeps me up at night. If Russia decides to sacrifice another 100,000 soldiers in a desperate counteroffensive, could they simply overwhelm Ukrainian defenses through sheer numbers? That is the question nobody has a good answer to yet. Let me give you 3 ways this could play out from here. Scenario 1, Ukraine keeps pushing. If Western aid flows consistently and Ukraine's drone production scales up further, they could force Russia into a prolonged stalemate where neither side gains ground. Analysts at the European Council on Foreign Relations discuss this outcome as increasingly likely. The technology advantage that Ukraine has developed might prove decisive over time the way air power proved decisive in the Gulf War. Scenario 2, Russia digs in. If Russia mobilizes its reserves and launches a massive counterattack in early 2025, as some intelligence reports suggest, Ukraine's gains could evaporate quickly. Russia still has the largest tank fleet in Europe, and they have learned from their early mistakes. This is what happened in the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union, when initial Finnish success was erased by Soviet manpower advantages. Scenario 3, both sides negotiate. If the economic pain from energy disruptions and military costs becomes unbearable for both Moscow and Kyiv, back-channel negotiations that nobody is talking about publicly right now might suddenly become official. This is what several former diplomats I have spoken with privately believe could happen by 2025. The pattern of history shows that most wars end at the negotiating table, not on the battlefield. What this moment really means is hard to say cleanly. You have families in eastern Ukraine who were evacuated from Toretsk watching news of the recapture on their phones from temporary housing in Dnipro. They do not know if their homes still exist or if they can ever go back. Their childhood memories are buried under rubble somewhere. You have Russian families in border villages who never expected war on their own soil, now living under drone attack alerts every night. They wake up at 2 in the morning to sirens and hide in basements while explosions shake the walls above them. You have young men in their 20s on both sides who joined the military because they had no choice, and now wonder if anyone in the world even remembers why this started. They are just trying to survive one more day. These are not chess pieces. These are people whose entire understanding of their future changed in a single morning. The war took their plans, their dreams, their normal lives, and replaced them with something none of them signed up for. This brings me to the question I want to ask you before you go. If Ukraine can strike Russian refineries and capture Russian territory but still cannot force Putin to the negotiating table, what would actually end this war? Would it take NATO boots on the ground, or would economic collapse be the only language Moscow understands? Maybe the real answer is that wars like this do not end with victory at all. They end when both sides get exhausted enough to accept something less than everything they wanted. Drop your answer in the comments because I genuinely want to know what you think. And in the next video, I am going to show you exactly how Ukraine built the drone fleet that made this all possible, the story behind the factories that are changing modern warfare forever, and why the technology they developed might be the most important military innovation since the atomic bomb. You will not want to miss this one.